All right. I want to get a new podcast out, or a new episode, should I say? I've been I don't know. I've been kind of spent the last couple of days kind of fighting with my sound and everything, and that's been kind of hindering me as far as episodes are concerned. Well, let me take that back. It's been hindering me as far as sound is concerned. It has not been hindering me as far as episodes are concerned. It's part of podcasting. You get to a point to where you keep getting stuck because you're trying to I don't know, you're trying to sound like, you know, the professional podcasters, one who send their episodes out and they got people that clean them up and, normalize them and whatever to make them sound good. And, don't get me wrong, I'll spend a lot of money on my equipment, but it's just, that's I guess that's the lie. I would say, that they tell home podcasters so you can, because it's all about the sale. It's not about what this stuff is actually doing. It's all about the sale because they want you to buy something that they put out here that's going to do something that it's really not. It's just not. It's not. It's just not. If you're not, some engineer that can, precisely EQ and all this other stuff, it's just not something that's going to, not something that's going to work. So I did, I did get my 528 dialed in though. That's one good thing. And then I just a few minutes ago, I just made up an EQ that kind of sweetens this particular uh sound here. It just sweetens it a little bit and that kind of thing. And I was using the podcast plugin, but I don't think I'm gonna use it no more because it's like I don't know, the thing is kind of glitchy, and it's like I don't know, it's kind of more trouble than it's really kind of more trouble than it's really even worth, using because you put it in and you may say, hey, I want this at we'll say 16 decibels or whatever, or 16 loops, should I say. And then, you put it in there and it'll start, your file maybe at maybe negative 28. So you can watch the meter and it'll start at negative 28, then it'll kind of go down one by one. And then towards the end of the file, it'll race down to 16 decibels. And it's like now your file is 28 three-quarters of the way through. And then the last maybe, 5 minutes, it shoots up to negative 16 decibels. So when the listener is listening to it, they wondering, okay, why is this file getting louder as I'm listening to it? So it's just not I don't feel that it's I don't feel that it's a professional type of thing. At least not for me that I would use. It's something I tried in my process of being in the rabbit hole, but not something that I would try or even recommend. It's just I don't know. It's just not something that I would really fool with myself. So it's just I mean that's podcasting. But don't get me wrong, it's free. So I mean you can't beat that. I made I had what was it, base 44. I had Base 44 make me an app, something similar to that app somewhat. It takes your file and does the whole EQing and all kinds of stuff. So I mean, it's not a bad app. Don't get me wrong, but you have to have the. I'm assuming the sound that you have coming in has to be, you know, right where you want it. Because it doesn't do a bad job. Don't get me wrong. Definitely doesn't do a bad job. I mean, for free. Went to Base 44 and had it make the app. EQ and everything. That's not bad. I put up a couple episodes with it. I may even try it today. To be honest, just run this episode through it and maybe test it out. Maybe I'm not saying I am, but just a thought. I may just say, you know what, screw it. Stick with my little TDR EQ sweetener that I just made and run with it because I'm always thinking that the next plug-in or the next whatever will help my podcast. And to be honest, it's probably already good. Right out the mic. Because I got a 528, I got a Shure SM7DB, I got a Rodecaster. I got tons of plugins. Silk Vocal, Curves EQ, Velvet, Element 12, Acusinus. So I got a ton of plugins. TDR Nova's plugins and everything. Their EQ, both of their compressors. So I have plugins and everything. Don't get me wrong. And another thing, I definitely try to put out good episodes. That's my goal. I want to put out good episodes that are easy to listen to. I don't like putting out garbage. That's just not my thing. But when you have to be careful when you're stacking plugins and everything, because those plugins, if you listen real close, those plugins they start to sound processed. And that's not what I want. I want I want a natural, slightly compressed, so it's not dynamic, EQ'd, no noise. So I got the expander, and I'll throw like a sibilance plugin. I forgot I had that one. I'll throw that on, and maybe clarity afterwards, really really light, and just to clean it up a little bit if there's anything there, and just run with it. And that's part of it because that's the way I look at it personally. Is it's about keeping going. Even though I have all these problems, everybody hates their fucking voice. I'm still here. I'm still keeping going. I'm like one or two episodes away from 100 episodes on my other podcast, Stuff You Should Think About. So it's it's a process. And I'm not gonna stop just because I'm in the rabbit hole and I can't, trying to get my sound together. I'm not gonna stop just because of that. I'm not gonna I'm not going to allow that to define me. So that's just not something that I'm gonna do. So, it's just it's a process. You can't let it get you down. because honestly, no matter what, there are plenty of podcasters that have horrible sound that keep putting it out. I've heard professional podcasts that you could hear the noise. You could hear their noise gate opening and closing because you could hear the air when they started talking. You could hear that hiss in the background when they started talking. Did they stop the podcast? Absolutely not. They kept going. They kept, put it out there. Next episode, put it out there. Next episode, kept going. So you don't get me wrong. This advice I'm about to give, I hate taking it, absolutely. But you find a good place and you run with it. It's not about being perfect. It's about finding a place that works and roll with it. And I think it was ChatGPT, I think, told me that's what that's what professional sound engineers do. They find a good spot and roll with it. They don't keep tweaking to find the perfect spot. They find a spot that sounds good and they roll with it. Which I thought all sound engineers had the secret code to a perfect podcast, and obviously common sense says if you got 10 different sound engineers, they're gonna have 10 different ways of adjusting their settings. So, you kind of got to pull your head out of that fucking dream, that you think of, where everything is perfect, because we're all human. So it's like, if you get nothing else from this episode, keep going. Fix your episode the best you can, push it out there. So then I'm hoping that listeners can see the progress. See the progress, they see, what you're trying to do, keep it moving. Have a good one.